this exercise.
Mm-hmm.
So as I said, on Wednesday, you'll be putting it into the program, and I'll help you with that and show how to do that. And then you will be presenting this cognitive map on the 23rd instead of this Wednesday, because I think you need more time. So on the 23rd, because we have some time, and you're both going to be presenting this communication task and the cognitive map. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about communication, and it's going to be more about communication to the general public. So popular scientific communication, you know, pretty much about like writing papers and such things. So some of it will probably also be connected if you're presenting to conferences, and maybe some of the tools you can also use for poster presentations as well. So first of all, communication and dissemination is of course an important part of research and projects, as it is, I would say, one of the most important channels to create impact, so that the research that you do is actually heard and used and becomes a tool, not only for yourself, but also for stakeholders and also the general public. Yeah. And why is communication important? Well, so communicating science, I would say, with the broad range of audience, is actually an art in itself. And it can happen in like as scientific communication or dissemination. It actually happens, you know, in conferences, research workshops, or through these peer-reviewed publications. Scientific communication with other audiences happens in other ways. So this can be through, popular scientific, you know, articles, microdocs, I'm gonna be talking about. Yeah, other ways, but also the way that is told in a way that people understand is of course important. And if one is really good at that, one can contribute with, like, by introducing new perspectives and ideas, both for the people that you communicate to, but you also have maybe the opportunity to learn from them as well and hear their responses to this. It can help influence policy. So think, if you're really good at communicating your knowledge to the public, they can push and pressure policymakers instead. They want to get voted for at the election. And if you have been good to make people aware that this is a problem, then the public will pressure the policy that this is important. And then the politicians will say, okay, this is important so that I can be elected, you know? Try and push it in another way. It invites for collaboration and engagement, so also with local people, also that the science you do is relevant for the general public. I came with an example with Svalbard, where people were saying that the reindeers were not being properly monitored. There was also some glaciers that they were mentioning that were not properly monitored, but actually they are. And they have been pretty much monitored, but it's because researchers are bad in communicating this and making it accessible for the general public. And in relation to glaciers, it's quite important because it's one of the glaciers that people were moving up on, using as a bridge for transport in winter. So there, it's really relevant that the researchers are good and at showing that this is available and making it useful for people. So making your science useful. It also creates trust and transparency. So sometimes people say, oh, I don't believe what researchers say. They say so much. But if you're good in communicating, it can create trust and transparency. Yeah, and it also makes your research relevant and gives it a voice. And that's fantastic. You use so much. Of course it should be heard. And then, as I mentioned also as the example with glaciers, that it's an important resource for people. Because today, often communication looks like this. Like scientists, they blabber among each other. And the public, they are just like, huh, what's going on? So, and now we have like a sentence going into everything. That if it's good, then of course people really talk about the things, but then also other elements comes into the research. We remember the things as we were talking about sustainability, ethics, and values, that these things are important to have in mind when we talk about sustainability sciences, when we engage people and good and communicate mitigation, ethics, values, literacy. It can be like ocean literacy, and values also come into perspective, and that makes your research valuable. Yeah. And this is also what I would say you want to achieve with your challenge as well. So apart from scientific publications, there are many different ways of doing research, and you've probably seen this before. And one of them is visual communication, which I think is a fantastic tool. So it's one of the strongest ways of telling a visual story. It's a transmission of information and ideas using, like, it can be symbols, imagery, and there are a significant a tool to simplify, like unsimplified things. So when things are difficult to explain, one can use these imagery ways in making it simple for people to see. It's also a really good way to kindle people's curiosity and make them look, what is this? But it's also a really good tool to widen the audience that are going to look at this, and also quickly share it. And that can also be through media spaces. So visual communication, I would say, is one of the biggest keys. And we see it today, like phones, visual all the time. Instagram, Snapchat, all those things, when we scroll, is often either the what's it called? The heading that is important, or the image which is important that catches our eye. So that's really important. And also, as the saying goes, a picture is worth 1,000 words. This was before social media came up. So, and since infographics and pictures and have both pictures and words, it represents the best in both worlds and the ability to dissect these complex subjects. And here I'm talking about infographics, which I'll come into and show you an example of. And why that I talk about infographics is that humans by nature are visual. So 90% of the information that is transmitted through our brain is visual. And that is processed 60,000 times faster in the brain than text. So doing things visually is really important. And that's probably also why that we are so hooked on this as well in today's world. So here we have an example of an infographic. And this is a mixture of images but also text. And what I would say with infographics, it can like cover heavy topics in an enjoyable way. There are many different examples. And people rather look at an infographic than read a lengthy text. It's an easy way to get a grasp of the topic. And that also that the figures and the text, they, connect to each other. And in some way, one can say they tell a story. And it also helps the readers process the content more when it's connected with both imagery and text. And of course, things are highlighted, but it also gives the tool that, because it's set up as it is, infographics, it also makes people to explore, So this catches the world eye. Okay, 100 million plastic bottles used worldwide every day. And then they try to see, but this is connected to here, and how is this? So it's also engaging, and what makes people want to explore is it's not only just a picture of a plastic bottle. And for this, if one wants to work with infographics, a really good inspiration is Pinterest. Is really good to find inspiration for infographics if one wants to work with that. And also, why use or combine visual aspects is that in average, people only see 20% of the text on a web page during a visit. So it's also, yeah, researchers love writing things, have difficulty in keeping it simple because we should not forget everything that is so important, but you also have to think who you're communicating it to. It's also policymakers as well, that one should always remember how much does one write, and that one should get to the point pretty fast, and that it should be clear and concise. Then we have like another way of doing communication that of course all of you know of, and that is presentations. But some presentations can be nice and simple, and others can be of course bold and interactive. But the biggest importance is that a presentation is made to meet the audience, and it gets easily to the point, and it's fun and easy to use and persuasive and engaging. Also that, but at the same time, one should also make you stand out, but it should also show that you're knowledgeable, that it's not only fun you're talking about, but you're actually also professional. So there are different ways of doing this, and I don't know why this didn't work. But we can see here if it actually changes or it doesn't. No. Okay, it was an example of a presentation. Then of course one has social media, which is also a very important tool. And I would say it's one of our most important voices, because here it's a very good way to tell who we are. It gives us a voice. As I said, it's the strongest tool, but it's also the best tool to reach a wide audience. But it's also important to think what channels you use in connection with what. So like Facebook, it's good to meet, like in Norway, it would be good to have like these community groups. So it can be the old days on Ringvassøy. That's a group. So there you could reach people who are connected to that. But also the age limit for Facebook is above 45. So if you want to reach people who are above 45, it would be this. So this you have to think about. If it's Instagram, it's the ones who are around 25 to the 45 are the people on Instagram, maybe a little younger. Then we have Snapchat, which is the youngest, I would say, and TikTok. Then we have Twitter, which is mostly if one wants to reach policymakers and researchers. And also LinkedIn, which is a tool that researchers use. So things one always has to think when one wants to use communication and different channels is also who you want to reach. And that is also, you always have to think, and that's also when you make an infographic, if you're making a presentation, if you're making a website, you always have to think, who is it I want to reach? Because the way you communicate something for a policymaker is different for a fisherman or a young child in high school, or just normal people on the street. So one has to think about that. An example of, if we can move here. Okay, 1 second. It froze. One sec. Sorry. Oh, I lost my mouse. Oh, here it is. Where is it there? Here it goes. An example here, this is a post which is made for both Facebook and social media. And this is a connection with a project where we want to reach students, master students, and maybe also some PhDs. And this is in Finland that we're having a workshop. And here one keeps it quite like, one makes like different images. So first to catch the eye. Then it's very, very short. What is the purpose? Very short. What is the program? And then a QR code to register. So here we keep it quite concise. Someone tries to use different colors also to catch people's eye. And that is a way of doing it, maybe I would say more engaging, and that people want to, you know, hey, what is this about? But of course also the title. Like if we had called it the what takes precedence, climate mitigation or biodiversity conservation. I don't know if people would, you know, look at like if it's more, it would be more catchy than your voice matters, my voice. What's that about? So titles are also important when you do communication. Another example can be this one. Now I hope it's not that high, because this is oh, there's no sound. This is a short introduction to a research project, which instead of having a website or having a web page, it shows like what is this about. So it's talking about that it's about understanding, engagement, and how we can gather all data together. So this is also a way of doing communicating science, and it's actually quite easy to do so. And here you have like quite a little time to do that. Another way is doing it with micro docs or reels or stories on Instagram. And I would really want this, if I could get this on, this sound. I don't know if I go to the next one, because this is an example of, there's no sound on it, and why not?
Med tareskogen, at den blir spist opp, det er jo ekstremt brutalt. Og da ble jeg ganske sjokka, for å si det helt litt.
Tang og tare er noe av det viktigste vi har. Det er en av de plantene i verden som er best på fotosyntese. Det er veldig viktig, for det lagrer karbon, slipper ut oksygen. Men den viktigste funksjonen taren har, det er at den skaper et økosystem lokalt. Utfordringen til taren akkurat nå er at kråkeboller spiser taren. At mange andre plasser der det egentlig skulle vært en blomstrende skog er et minfelt av kråkeboller.
Predatorene som spiser kråkeboller ikke er der lenger. Og det er for eksempel steinbit. Den spiser noen kråkeboller. Og dette her har gått så langt at den klarer ikke naturen å balansere dette her selv. EU-prosjektet Agora, Arctic Atlantic Agora, er en møtesplass for å skape et living lab mellom næring og forskere for å prøve å finne.
So this microdoc is made, of course, as a teaser for a research project, but it also tells a story. And what it also wants by having these people telling their like personal experience is also to put some emotions into it. So emotions that you can relate to say, oh, like the sea has always been important to me, but now there's nothing left. So also when one makes like such communication, it's important to touch people's empathy and feelings as well, and I'll get back to that as well. Another way also one can do it is like through reels also, which you know, just really small short fun stories that one also can use and communicate with, just to give like small inputs on what is happening when you do research. The next also is also, and this is quite fun, because what you're going to be doing when your exercise is to choose a tool to communicate your sustainability challenge. And what you can do it through like infographics, you can do it through a presentation, you can also try and make a microdoc There's different programs you can use. And last year some made like a podcast, and that was really fun because they played different roles. So one was like a guy who was having his what's it called, his point of view, and then they were talking about this research, why it was important. He was like the little critical one, and it was quite fun. And with the tools that I'm going to link to, you have quite a lot of material. So what I think about this project is a fun way of see it as a fun way to explore, and it doesn't have to be perfect when you do this, when you try the different ways of communicating. So this one is a podcast that I actually made quite some years ago. And this is just the teaser for it. But now there's no sound again. Okay. But when we speak about communication, it's not only with words we can choose, but also with the patterns of sound we can create and the movements that create them. So from the natural rhythm of speech to be precise timing characterizes of a constant, these patterns guide our daily communication, and using these rhythms to communicate stories is a unique tool. And I'll get back to why I say that stories are important, and why also a podcast could be an idea to communicate this. So the primary benefit of when we talk about visual communication or verbal is, as I mentioned before, that it's immediate. That we see it visually, it's something that we catch. Whereas if we use written communication, that even though it's one of the most important ways of making one's knowledge and data sustainable and more applicable, when we combine these two, it actually heightens the way how people get it and how they interact, how they understand, and how they can use it in the future. Another way of making or communicating your sustainability challenge can also be through a web page like this one. And this here one has used Spark, and I'll also link to this. And here you can add like images and text and pictures as well. This is also a really good tool. So it gives like a very short and sweet overview if you use this as a tool for communicating your sustainability challenge. But there are also some good guideline practices. So first of all, one has to keep things simple. So colors, font, pictures, and text. One has to be consistent, in the way the fonts and the colors that one uses, so it doesn't become messy, because then people begin to get confused. Then there's also things like websites. And I don't think when you work, this is just an example on how a very simple website can be, which is short and concise for a research project that has some very few words and combining some images to show what it's all about. And that's also a way one can do it. Another fun way I think could be really fun for you also with your sustainability challenge was you can also work with something called story maps. I don't know if you have heard about it before, but this actually is a tool where you can put like geographical points, and then you can move to different areas and actually tell the story of the area. So for like an example could be Arctic Center, you could have Hokoibotn, or where it's going to be, and there you can say, okay, show this is going to be here. Here is a calving area for reindeer. Here's a specific place where the water runs, Communicate the project through this way. So these are different ways of doing it. And here also, as I write here in the text, like the narrative cartography are maps that are more than diagrams, but they actually make you travel through a landscape and through a story, which I think is really, really important. Another example of a story map is where it's put up a little differently, where you can combine both pictures and text. And you can see here, one second, here we have cognitive map. If we scroll down, this resembles, of course, of Spark, and you can also see that they're here. You can see how they move around, and to each point, there's a story here. So you actually move through the landscape, and there's told a story of consistency. And that is also something you can use like with your masters, like when you're gonna be defending your masters, if it has something environmental to do. It could be a really nice way to show this, both combine it with text, and then have this map like where you can move around the environments. I think that's a very beautiful way of communicating, especially through your master dissertation. And this is made using ArcGIS. They have like a story map function, which you actually can get access to if you want to. Mm-hmm. But when we talk about science communication and what makes people care, it's of course important to here invoke emotion. So go beyond sadness and fear. So go beyond the pride, humor, parental love. Bring hope, that it can be hope that climate change is effective. Give value. So find out where do our values intersect, because if you say, that's also why it's important to know your audience. So if you know I'm going to be communicating to Anne in this sustainability challenge, and she loves humans. So when I do this, I'm going to tell the story of why humans are important and values, and then she will relate to this, and her emotions will rise when she hears this. So, and also in connection with values, it's important also to tell what is this good for, and why is this good for me, the person who's listening. Why is this important for me? That you have to tell the story. And why is it also good for the world? Why do we need this common goal? Why do we need to work together? But also to make the action calls, or the actionable calls to action, that they should be actionable and applicable. And this doesn't even go to normal people. This also goes to policymakers, I would say, and a wide range of stakeholders if you want them to understand. So first of all, make it easy to make a difference. And also tell people how, but in a simple way. Make it relevant to people's lives. An example can be maybe like Arven etter Nansen, you know, that project, that huge project that's working far out in the Barents Sea. Why the heck is that important for me? Well, they're also looking at weather systems and climate change that might impact that I cannot ski anymore. If there was Tromsø without snow, what would Tromsø be? So what their studies are doing is also looking at weather system and climate change, but it can also be in connection with fisheries, that we will not be able to have food on our table. That's why it's relevant to me, even though it's I don't know how many 1,000 kilometers in the middle of nowhere. And then of course it says that you need media campaigns, that you have to tell the story in different ways as well. But also this, talk in pictures. So avoid abstractions, make it clear. But also again, 1/3 of the brain devotes to vision. Make it visual. And also make pictures with words. But also talk in definitions, so connect to what people know. All these abstract words doesn't make you clever. What actually makes you really clever, and what is a really good exercise in connection with dissemination, but also your sustainability challenges, if you can tell the thing in a simple way, you have understood it 100%. When you cannot tell it in a simple way, you are not really sure what you're doing. And I know it by myself. Like if I'm 100% good in telling something, I've really understood the scope. But if it's flying a fluffy a little bit, if I explain it a little fluffy and with some crazy words, it's because I'm not totally there where I 100% understand it. But also if you can say it in a simple way, it also makes it more transparent for the people who are listening. So yeah, you don't need to use technical terms. Yeah. And then also you have to think when you tell something is you should tell it like a story. People love stories. We love stories when we were kids. Story and storytelling is very valuable. And when somebody says, I have something to tell you, I have a story, people will silence down and listen if it has a storyline. So it's, when you make science communication, think it as a story. Also when you're doing the infographic, think it as a story. The podcast, think it as a story. The presentation, that's also why the story map and the one I showed you made in Akis, where I said it's a fantastic tool for making your master presentation, is because it naturally puts the presentation into a story, because you scroll down and it becomes a story all by itself. So, and then of course it says here, data without stories can be harmful because people don't understand. And then also we are wired to share novel and surprising info, but also make the familiar new. Some things that can be familiar can also say, oh, is that really important? I didn't know that. And that is important. Wow. Then they feel, then they will remember it. So this infographic you will have, this is also an infographic. This I will download also, so you can use it both for when you're going to do communication, but also I would say that is a good tool for your work also in the future, because communicating science is getting more and more important. And also if you want to work, but not only science, you do communication everywhere you work. And it is just important. It's one of our strongest tools. So being able to do it in a good way is important. So I mentioned it a little bit before, but that is, of course, it's important to know your audience. So you have to identify and get to know your audience. So what appeals to them? What are their interests? So you can give them this aha effect, or that you can tell this emotional thing, or catch them the empathy or the emotional aspect where they start to listen, or that they actually can connect to this. Identify their needs, interests, values, ethics, and concerns. So it's very important that you think about these things when you do communication. But also, what background knowledge might they have about the topic? Do you need to make a small introduction, or do you need to tell it in a different way, or do they already know a lot so you don't bore the hell out of them starting from scratch? So such are things that you need to know. And also connect to what people know and the familiar new, which I think is very, very important. So when you are going to be doing this exercise with communication, first of all, you're going to be choosing a tool. So the ones that I could propose was the infographic, and there I'm going to list up some programs you can use which are free to use. That's a fun way. Maybe using a story map could also be an engaging way to describe, to use. The podcast could also be fun for some. And then it can also be a web page, as I showed you, where we use Spark, can also be a good way to present it. But what you should remember is that it should be to the general public. So the language should be simple, it should be understandable, applicable. Make the familiar new, again. And some things, like the ones of you having offshore windmills, is also why is it important. And that can be something with the fishery that has shaped the cultures along the coast in northern Norway, all the way back to the Viking times. This is why people have settled here. And the sea has been the scape of movement. And now there comes these windmills. What does it mean for these coastal cultures? What does it mean for those islands that are identified as, bird islands, where the community met to gather eggs and generations are still meeting when they, collect eggs and distribute it within the community, Try to get these connections to people and what they're familiar with. So a task is to, of course, make it engaging. So you first have to trigger and engage us. You have to simplify it. So make your complex information, make it quite clear, and also what is the scope, what do you want with this challenge? Make it accessible, and then make it memorable. And that means that you should, give us this wow effect that is something that you're familiar with or can relate to. And these are the tools, and I'll put it in, that you can use. And here we also have some different, So for infographic, you can use a good, and I've tried all these different ones. And I would actually recommend for infographic, you have Pictochart, Canva, and Visme. Canva is really good. Presentations, of course, PowerPoint, but there's so many other fun ways of making PowerPoints. So Canva is a really good tool for making PowerPoints, also if you want to make a PowerPoint, because it can make it engaging. And there's also examples on how it can be. There's also Prezi, some of you know, but for some you feel that they can get a little seasick because you're jumping around and everything. For making videos, if you want to make a microdoc or a video, and video if you use Adobe Spark, or if you use VVideo or Canva, especially VVideo, Canva, and there's probably also a lot of other apps you already know. But here you can also put like things that move on top, like layers, so it gets more engaging. And that's also fun. So it's just, see this exercise as a creative way of communicating what you're gonna do. The web page or the web post, I would propose that you use Adobe Spark, and that's also free and very easy to use and fun as well. The podcasts, I would propose you use VVideo, which is you can also get for free. And there are probably also apps on the telephone that you can use, and of course you use your telephone to record. And then if you want to jump in to make the story map, which is also, it's not that difficult at all. There is NightLab story maps, which is also for free. And then if you want, you can also ask to get access to ArcGIS story maps as well. And here also, if you need images like PNGs, icons, small film clips, you can also get film clips. You can look at something called FreePic, that is mostly for icons. And then Canva has a lot of different icons, PNGs, and films, and pictures as well. And then Unsplash is also really good for getting pictures. So there's a huge library in finding material that you can use and play with. Yeah. So, yeah. So for the seminar, and I think you can already begin to look at what tools you want to use now when I'm finished speaking, and then I can also help you out, so that if you just want to talk to me and ask about some of the programs, I will help you. So for the 23rd of October, you need to use one of the tools that I have presented, or one of the ways of presenting your sustainability challenge. And when you disseminate, or I would say, like, you have to of course present the dissemination, but before you of course have to present to us, just to tell us, okay, what is our target group? So you tell, okay, we have made this infographic and it's supposed to meet school children. So we know that, and then you show what you have made. And of course, yeah, you present the sustainability challenge that you intend to address and the aims and objectives of your study. And then you also need to present the social ecological system method employed and the reason for reasons for choosing that one or those. And there you should think of the things that you have had with Vera. Yeah. Are there any questions? Yeah?
Defining the target audience, I think this is a challenge, right?
If it's a challenge, or it can be a challenge, or
I think in general it's challenge because I have an example. There is
Yeah.
a friend of mine who are published in Science and Nature,
yeah,
so he is top scientist,
yeah,
and he tried to simplify what he is publishing to the public,
yeah,
and he simplified very very much. So when you read the post, it's not scientific anymore,
no,
and include a lot of scientific error.
okay.
So
yeah,
he
of course one
simplified
has
it
too
to-
much.
too much.
Yeah.
So this I think still challenge
It
to,
is challenging.
especially if you are using social media.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe another short comment.
Yeah.
It's somehow related to this 23 of October. Actually, this is made very well the module number 14 and 15 in Inspiring the Mind.
Okay.
So student can get second certificate from Inspiring the Mind using this thing.
Okay.
So Inspiring the Mind is an EU project that we are hosting here, and we have 15 modules. The last two modules is sort of communicate the science to public. And it's not planned, but by luck I am here. So if you submit this to Vera or to
It's me,
Anne,
Yeah.
and submit it to me by email or so, you can get a second certificate from the Inspiring.
So you get extra credits.
I don't think it will be considered here credit, but it will be certificate. Can be.
Yeah.
I hope it next year I can negotiate here with the people to
Yeah.
have 5 credit out of it.
Any questions? Any concerns? No?
Sounds like it can be difficult to choose, but
Yeah.
that's it.
But I think this is very, very important because from experience, if you didn't communicate your research, you are not a successful person. So you need to communicate it. Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah, that's correct. You need to communicate it either to researcher by publication,
Yeah.
which is hard communication, or to public.
Yeah.
I think to be fine.
They all became very quiet.
Thinking.
Yeah, but we have 15 minutes left. So if you can just when do you close? No, not 15 minutes. Yeah, 45 minutes left. So what I think is that you go into the groups. I will leave, I'll just go one slide behind, and there you can see the different tools. Remember, you can find a lot of inspiration through Prezi, and you also had a nice infographic with the windmills before. But look, what is there different places, and see how you can communicate this, and then you can call me and I can show you, like if you want to do a story map with Night Lab, how is it to just quickly set it up. It's really easy and intuitive, or if you want to make videos or something, I will help you out with those things. Okay? Super. Yes.